On my way home from work, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire while he was out? Surely it's not our home. Thinking this, I hurried home to find our house safe and sound. Feeling relieved, I had no time to relax. I asked my friend to watch my kids while I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. Although I had heard he suffered from a fire, his burns didn't look severe. The room had 2 beds, and the other bed had its curtain closed. According to the doctor, my husband had some burns, but they should heal in a few weeks. The more serious issue was a broken spine from jumping out of a 3rd-floor window to escape the fire, which might leave lingering effects. On my way back to the room after the doctor's explanation, a nurse apologized for placing my husband in a room with a female patient. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was also a victim of the same fire, and they were brought to the hospital together. Where did the fire happen?
Well, it's work-related, so I can't tell you. Just go home and bring me a change of clothes.
Why should I?
What do you mean, why? It's normal for a wife to take care of her hospitalized husband's needs.
I don't know about that. You always ignore me and the kids when we're sick, so don't expect me to take care of you.
That's a ridiculous excuse.
While my husband was talking, the door to the hospital room opened. Someone I knew entered, and I was a little confused as the curtain to the other bed was opened. Seeing the person lying in the bed, I was speechless. My name is Amy. I have a family of 4 with my husband and our 2 sons, ages 3 and 5. I'm currently 30 years old and have been working at the company I joined when I was 22. My husband used to work at an IT company but quit about a year ago. The reason, he said, was to adopt a more modern way of working. My husband quit his job without consulting me, which led to an argument, but he wouldn't listen, insisting that freelancing will bring in more money. When I criticized him for not discussing it with the family, rather than worrying about the income, all he would say was, "Don't worry, our income will increase." After quitting, my husband started freelancing from home. At first, things seemed to go well, but he gradually began to slack off. He wouldn't get up until noon and seemed to spend the late nights playing games in his office. Whenever I asked when he was working, he always said,
"I have a duty of confidentiality, so I can't discuss my work with you, even as my family,"
and never gave me a straight answer. Initially, his income was $2,000 a month, but has steadily decreased, and for the past 6 months, it has only been about $500 a month. I wouldn't have minded if he helped with housework with his low income, but despite being home all the time, he didn't do any housework or childcare. Not only did he never help with chores, but when the kids caught a cold, he'd say,
"I can't afford to catch it too,"
and would leave home for a few days. When I got sick, I asked my husband to take care of our son because I was going to the hospital, but he would say,
"Why don't you just take the kids and go to the hospital?"
And he locked himself in his workroom. With no income, no help with housework or childcare, and not even showing concern for his family, my husband was becoming unbearable. I thought about getting a divorce since it seemed the burden was only on me, and he didn't appear to be a good father to our sons. However, I was so busy every day that I could only make slow progress on preparing for the divorce, and I spent my days feeling frustrated. During that time, my husband, who rarely left home, began to go out more often, claiming he had errands to run, and started keeping his cell phone with him at all times. I quickly noticed the changes in my husband and suspected him of having an affair. In the past, I might have been shocked by my husband's infidelity, but this time I secretly celebrated in my heart that I could use this to my advantage in getting a divorce. I tried to gather evidence of the affair to get a divorce on the grounds of my husband's fault, but it was difficult to obtain evidence from his cell phone since he never let it out of sight, so I gave up. I considered hiring a private investigator to take photographic evidence, but we were living on almost solely my income, so I had hardly any savings. Every day I worried about how to catch my husband in his infidelity, and I could feel the stress building up. That's when a turning point came for me. After work, as I was heading home, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire away from home? It couldn't be our house, right? I rushed home with these thoughts in mind and found that the house was safe. Although I was relieved, there was no time to relax. I hurriedly went to pick up my sons and called my friend. I asked my friend if she could watch the kids because my husband had been taken to the hospital in an ambulance, and after dropping my sons off at her house, I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. I had heard about the fire, but his burns didn't seem too severe. The room had 2 beds, and the curtain was drawn around the other bed. As I was standing there in a daze, a nurse came in and told me there would be an explanation from the attending physician, so I left the room. The doctor said that although my husband had some burns, they would heal in a few weeks. What was worse was the broken bones. My husband had jumped from the 3rd floor to escape the fire, and the impact had fractured his spine with the possibility of residual effects. When I was told that there might be residual effects, the first thing that came to mind was that I should have divorced him quickly. I think I'm an insensitive person, but I couldn't even imagine taking care of my husband. As the explanation from the attending physician ended and I was on my way back to the room, the nurse apologized that my husband was sharing a room with a woman. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was someone who had been in the same fire as my husband and had been brought in together. Could it be that this woman was my husband's affair partner? I thought as I returned to the room and found my husband awake. Where did the fire happen?
Well, I can't tell you because it's work-related.
Seeing my husband hesitate, I became convinced that he had been with his affair partner when the fire happened.
Anyway, go home and bring me some clothes.
Huh? Why?
Why? You're my wife. It's obvious you should take care of your hospitalized husband.
Huh? I don't know about that. You ignore us when the kids or I are sick, so don't expect me to take care of you.
That's a ridiculous excuse.
As my husband was talking, the door to the room opened. It was Mr. Smith, the husband of my friend. Feeling a little confused to see someone I knew, Mr. Smith bowed to us and opened the curtain to the bed next to us. As the curtain opened, I saw my friend Mrs. Smith lying in the bed. I looked at my husband in surprise, and his face turned pale as he avoided my gaze. Ah, I see. It became clear that my husband's affair partner was Mrs. Smith, and I was too dumbfounded to speak. Mrs. Smith was a close friend among my friends, and she had even brought her child to our house to play. I had introduced Mrs. Smith to my husband at the time, so he should have known that she was my friend. I had told Mrs. Smith about my husband's recent coldness and my suspicion of his affair. I wondered what Mrs. Smith's intentions were when she listened to my story with a serious face, agreeing with me by saying, "I see." Was she trying to find out how much I knew about the affair? Suppressing my urge to confront my husband and Mrs. Smith immediately, I greeted Mr. Smith. "You're Mr. Smith, right? Your wife has always been a great help to me."
"Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit flustered."
"I heard your wife and my husband were in the same fire. He won't tell me where it happened. Do you know anything about it?" When I asked, Mr. Smith glanced briefly at my husband.
"I'm sorry that your husband was also caught in the fire. The fire occurred at my house."
"It happened at your house? I didn't know my husband was visiting you." When I looked back at my husband, he was hiding under the covers. Excuse me, I have something I'd like to talk about. Do you have time?"
"Yes, I have time."
I had a pretty good idea of what Smith was going to talk about. We moved to a nearby diner where Smith told me that he had suspected his wife of cheating for several months and was gathering evidence. He had once looked at his wife's phone and found a photo of her looking cozy with another man in her photo album. So now he had hired a private investigator to take indisputable photos of the affair. I told him that I had also suspected my husband of cheating for a while, but didn't know who the other person was. When I said I intended to divorce my husband, Smith agreed to help me, and we discussed our plans for the future. 2 days later, Mr. Smith and I went to the hospital together, and my husband and Mrs. Smith were still sharing a room. When my husband and Mrs. Smith saw us enter, their faces tightened. "I'm glad you both seem well. I came to your room the day before yesterday, but you were resting, so I couldn't talk to you. Are your injuries okay?" Yeah. I fractured my shoulder, so I need to rest for a while." "That's tough. You'll need money now, so I hope you recover quickly." "Well, our child is still young, too." "That's right. You'll have to pay child support, so you'd better heal up and start looking for a job." Mrs. Smith seemed confused and didn't understand what I was talking about.
"Hey, stop rambling. You brought my clothes, right?"
"I didn't bring them."
"You're useless."
"I told you before that I wouldn't take care of you anymore. What I brought you today isn't a change of clothes, it's this." As I said this, I took the divorce papers out of my bag and shoved them in front of my husband.
"Huh? Divorce papers? Are you planning to dump me because I might have lingering injuries?"
"It's not because of your injuries. You said you had a business meeting the day you were taken to the hospital, right? So why were you at Mrs. Smith's house?"
Well, I didn't tell you, but Mrs. Smith is a business associate. We were discussing work at her house when the fire happened."
"Did you think that excuse would work? It's obvious that I know about your affair with Mrs. Smith. No matter how much you try to deceive and make excuses, it just looks ridiculous." As I said that, my husband's face turned sour and he defiantly retorted,
"Stop nagging about a little affair. Don't make such a fuss over a single affair. What will you do after the divorce? Can you raise our 2 kids on your own?
Of course I can. I've been raising them on my own all this time. You've never taken care of the kids, have you?
I've played with them.
It's only about an hour once every few months. The neighborhood fathers play with their kids' fathers more than you do.
Well, then it'll be tough with just one income. We've been living on 2 incomes up until now. Do you want our child to live in the hardship?
It'll be fine. In fact, without your expenses, our lives might even be easier.
But I'm injured.
So?
If people find out you left a husband who needs rehab, your reputation will suffer. It'd be better to divorce me after I'm fully recovered.
Because you are not someone who can stick to things for long. It's clear that you will give up on rehabilitation midway through. I can't wait until you fully recover. You have your lover to take care of, don't you? Upon hearing this, the husband glanced at Mrs. Smith and seemed to reluctantly accept the situation.
If you insist, I understand. I don't need you anymore. A bastard who serves divorce papers to an injured person. I'll divorce you. Now hand over the divorce papers.
As he reached out to grab the divorce papers, I kept them out of reach. No way.
What are you talking about? You want a divorce, right?
We haven't discussed alimony or child support yet.
You're trying to take money from an injured person? I need money for hospital bills and rehab.
Oh, right. You better hurry up with rehab and start earning money to pay alimony. You don't have any savings, do you? Huh? No savings? Mrs. Smith reacted with surprise to my words. My husband gave me a serious look and glared at me. You said you had 4 digits in savings. You said freelancing was profitable.
I meant I have enough income to easily save 4 digits. I'm just spending it as soon as it comes in now, but I can save up money quickly.
My husband desperately tried to make excuses. Although his current income was hardly $500 a month, I kept quiet because I didn't want to start a fight over it. Since they agreed to the divorce, I explained the future plans to my husband and Mrs. Smith. I told them that we had chosen a lawyer to consult about the compensation for the affair and that we would receive a certified mail from the lawyer later. Then we left the hospital room. As I returned home, I started preparing to move. While my husband was hospitalized, I went to thank the friend who took care of our children the day my husband was taken to the emergency room, bringing her a box of chocolates. I told my friend that my husband was fine, as he had been taken to the emergency room after the fire at Mrs. Smith's house, but was not in life-threatening condition. Moreover, the mom friend offered to take care of our children if things got difficult, so I also told her that I planned to divorce and move because of my husband's infidelity. Although I didn't directly mention that Mrs. Smith was my husband's affair partner, my friend seemed to understand. Of course, I intentionally made it obvious to my friend, but there were a few people who knew about my husband's involvement at Mrs. Smith's house fire, so the rumor would have spread even without me saying anything. Later, as we planned, I asked a lawyer to proceed with a divorce, but we couldn't easily decide on the compensation and child support amounts. At first, my husband boasted,
I'm a freelancer, so I can work from bed even if I'm injured. I plan to work all day because I'm free. I might even make over $100,000 a year. I won't take you back even if I become rich.
I had hoped that my husband's arrogance would make him pay the compensation and child support, but his hope of making $100,000 a year was shattered sooner than expected, and he started being reluctant to pay. He went from asking for an extension on the payment deadline to requesting a reduction in the amount, and eventually called me directly to plead.
Come on, $20,000 in compensation is too much. My infidelity is partly because you ignored me saying you were busy. Isn't $5,000 more reasonable? It's not that I can't make money. The clients who used to hire me stopped because I didn't meet the deadline once. It was just a few days late, so it's not my fault. I can't pay the compensation. If you really want the money, talk to those clients who stopped hiring me.
I've told you many times, talk to the lawyer about the compensation. I said just that and hung up the phone. After that, I asked the lawyer to tell my husband that we would go through mediation if the negotiations dragged on, and my husband easily accepted our terms. From there, everything went smoothly, and we received a lump sum payment for compensation and child support, finalizing the divorce. The Smith couple also divorced, and the husband gained custody of the children. The Smith family has 3 children, but it was revealed that during the affair, the wife left the 10-year-old eldest son to take care of the 2 younger siblings while she went out. After my son and I moved close to my parents' home, I heard from a friend that my husband and Mrs. Smith got remarried. The 2 of them are still living in the house where the fire occurred. My husband walks with a cane, and Mrs. Smith always has messy hair and a gloomy expression, making them look like an elderly couple even though they're still in their 30s. My husband has accumulated over $100,000 in debt due to alimony and child support payments, and Mrs. Smith, who is a stay-at-home mom, is being asked to pay child support for all 3 children, so together they must have quite a lot of debt. But I don't feel sorry for them since I significantly reduced the amount I claimed from my husband on the condition of a lump sum payment. My husband always blames others for his misfortunes, so I'm sure he's still doing that now. I felt refreshed after finally getting away from him. However, I feel guilty for making my two sons suddenly separate from their father and friends. At first, they were both bewildered in the unfamiliar place, but now they have become friends with the neighborhood kids and are having fun. On weekends, my parents come to visit and play with my sons, allowing me to have some time to myself. Since my husband left, I now have more time, money, and peace of mind. Thanks to the extra resources, I can give even more love and attention to my sons than before.